Okay, IDS Mob, today we have a special guest joining us. Her name is Lauren Smith, and she is a renowned professional speaker and author of the Mindful Dating Journal, Find a Healthy Love That Lasts, as well as the creator of the Date app, which is a tool designed to help people be more mindful daters. In fact, this whole show today, we're talking about how to be a more mindful dater, the concept of mindful dating, and how it can be used to help individuals navigate the dating landscape with intention and self-awareness. Lauren, welcome to the show.
Hey, Harry. Thank you so much for having me.
There was a guy that wrote me a couple weeks back, and he was asking about how to be more emotionally intelligent when dating. And then your request came in, and it was just like almost like kismet. Like there are so many guys out there, and there's people in general that don't know about mindful dating and what that entails and emotional intelligence. So I want to talk about all that stuff today. But I want to start out with the question I ask everybody, which is, what is your dating journey like, and what led you to start focusing on mindful dating?
Sure. Well, very recently, I sort of changed the way that I describe my journey to mindfulness. I used to say that I got dumped at Disney World, and I've revised it to recently say that temporarily loving one human, even though it was short-lived, changed my life in the best way possible. I'll tell you the story though, because it is very interesting, especially like when you think about Disney World, you think, oh, it's happy, it's magic. And that was actually where a really crazy, unexpected breakdown of my relationship occurred. My partner at the time, his name is Marco. I met him when I was traveling in Buenos Aires. He's Argentinian. Picture tall, dark, handsome, the sexiest accent. And I just threw all of my own personal dating rules out the window because I thought, wow, this is it. This is the Prince Charming I have been waiting for. And it feels so good. Why even bother thinking about red flags? I was only with Marco in Argentina for a few days before I had to come back to my home in the States. I'm from New Jersey. As the flight was landing, I was thinking about how Marco and I had made plans to get back together. We were going to reunite in a new country, Uruguay, and we had already decided that we were just going to keep traveling, like go to different countries, live our best lives. And it all sounded like such a beautiful fantasy. Like everything that I had ever wanted in dating was finally coming true. As that plane landed on the runway, I did what everybody else does, took out my phone, looked right away for any messages from Marco. He had sent me an email. It was titled -30. Marco was counting down 30 days left until we were going to meet up together again in Uruguay. I opened it and it was the sweetest love poem, like super cheesy, but like so cute. It felt like an ode to love to me. Like I was just perfect in his eyes, you know?
Yeah.
I wrote him an email back and we did that -29, -1 until we finally met up together. We spent that 30 days crafting the world's cheesiest romance novel. So I learned firsthand all the things that are great about a relationship, but I also learned how easy it is to mindlessly follow joy instead of remembering to be grounded and think about things like values, red flags. You got to look for them. We'll talk about why they're probably there. So eventually, I'm going to fast forward a lot because you already know that everything starts to break apart by the time he and I get to Disney World.
Okay.
At that time, my parents had come to join us. Well, my mom and my sister came to join Marco and I at the park. We went to Epcot. We drank at every country except for Marco. He's not a drinker. He, in my opinion, was pretty grumpy at that point. He and I had been on rocky ground. We were at that stage of conflict where, like, you don't even waste energy to talk about things anymore. You just kind of avoid the conflict entirely. So by the time my mom and my sister got there, I was like, oh, thank God, something else to do, to talk to instead of Marco. Right. And this tension that was building. It got to the point where I could tell by the time we were eating lunch in Morocco that Marco wasn't having a great time. So I was like, you know what? Why don't you go take one of the ferries back to the hotel, and me and my mom and my sister will catch you later. No big deal, you know? And he did. A few hours later, he ended up going back. My mom and I, we continued our journey around the world, getting a drink in every country, watched the fireworks, and eventually, after the park closed, we went back to the hotel too. My mom and my sister were staying in a room down the hall. So they went their way. I headed to mine in Marco's room. And I opened the door and it was like really clean in the room. And I thought, oh, Marco, I guess must have been bored and cleaned up. Maybe this is his white flag. Maybe he's kind of offering a resolution here. But upon further inspection, I realized it wasn't that he had cleaned up. It's that he packed up all of his stuff and left. There was no sign of him except for one love note that I had written to him. He was using it as a bookmark. He took it out of his book and left it on the nightstand for me. And I picked that up and just started crying hysterically. I couldn't be in the room anymore. I ran down the hall, burst open the door to my mom and my sister's room. And I was just like, what is wrong with me? Why does this keep happening to me? Because it wasn't the first time I felt like things just ended out of nowhere, despite how hard I had tried to make it work, despite the sacrifices that I thought I made to keep the other person happy. But in that moment, thankfully, I had a solid buzz from being at Disney World, and I had the love and kind support of my family. And they made me realize that it's not that there's anything wrong with me or you guys listening. It's just that I lack some key skills that if I would have known them sooner, I would have been able to see the ways in which our relationship was growing in an unhealthy direction. But I just kept following the path that was easy, the one that felt historically safe to me. But that doesn't mean that those default decisions are actually getting me the healthy relationship that I want. So I ended up digging into mindfulness, saying, well, what is it that I have to pay attention to now? How can I be fully present for all levels of my experience, not just the ones that feel good now? And that's when I realized that if I'm going to go out to date again, I have to bring all these skills with me. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep finding myself in that same painful pattern where people that I love feels like they abandon me. But it's really not, that wasn't the case. It was just that because I lacked the skills, I was almost abandoning my own needs in a way. So
now,
I
as you
figured out what they were.
Well, as you were doing the journey towards being more mindful, what are things looking back that you realized you were not paying attention to in that relationship that you missed or were just purposely ignoring?
Sure. When I first met Marco, he was telling me how he was going through, quote, a career transition. He was leaving a job that wasn't fulfilling and going to find a new career. And I thought, wow, this is amazing. Someone that really wants to pursue their passions, no matter what. Like, joy is more important than money. And keep in mind that my American dollar has so much more value than Argentinian pesos. So I was like, it's okay, Marco, while you're doing your job search, I'll take care of us. Like, in my mind, he was the one for me. He even signed all of those minus emails to me with the one. That's how far gone we were just in those first 30 days. So at this point, I was like, we're going to be together forever. I'll just, I'll take care of us. I'll buy the flights. I'll pay for the Airbnbs. I'll get you haircuts. That is, although it sounds nice, that's actually one of my toxic traits.
Oh, like the people pleaser?
Yes, the people pleaser. I swoop in and I overhelp. And it's not even that they necessarily ask me. I just think, oh, you need this. I'm going to just give it to you without you even telling me that you need it. And that builds resentment because he felt so much pressure to like have to work and to find the job. And then it was like, I felt like because I was giving him all that, that I was required something in exchange. And I started to get really bossy and really controlling and being like, why are you playing video games? You should be applying for jobs. Like, that's not my life. That's not my place
Interesting.
to say that. So it created a lot of mistrust and a big divide in our relationship. So those things that I just described, I call them toxic dating loops. It's basically a loop of pattern, like a pattern of behavior that we get stuck in, not because we're bad people or because we're bad at love, but because that's all we know from how we grew up. And learning that kept us safe. It served a function. But unless we can identify the loop, to take a step back with that mindfulness that we can talk about, like, how do you do that later? But if we can't like really take time to say, hey, there's something very specific that I'm doing here. And if I just figure out what it is, then I can stop doing it and I'll get a different result.
Now, it's interesting, as you were saying that, my thought was like, man, like, because this could be very well a scenario where you say, and he was doing all this stuff and it was really his fault and this and that, but you really went into how, like, you recognize the things you were doing were actually contributing to him not liking you. And I try to stress that on my end for guys. Like, sometimes when women are pulling away, it's because you're doing stuff that you might be unaware of, but like you're doing things that are causing a person that actually likes you to want to, like, get away from you. So how are you able to bypass the ego part that says, I want to blame everybody else, and then really internally look and say, but wait a minute, like, I'm the common denominator. It must be something that I'm doing.
Mm-hmm. I think that is built into mindfulness. So maybe we can take a step back and say, what even is mindfulness? People use this word in common language so often, and I don't think we're quite nailing it when we're like, oh, be mindful of the oncoming traffic. Like, it's not quite it. But then there's also people that think mindfulness is just for yogis or like people that meditate all day. It's really, I'm going to say, somewhere in the middle. You're noticing things, yes, and it is a practice, but it's more that it's the practice of noticing things in the present moment without judging it. You're not trying to say that it's bad, good, wrong. You're not trying to change it. Just saying, this is a person that I'm dating. They have XYZ qualities. I have XYZ qualities. When I look at the facts of this situation, is it going to lead me to what I want? But in order to do that, you have to learn to really get that ego out of the way and allow things to come up that might be painful to admit. I think that's what you're saying, is like, sometimes it's scary to look at the truth of ourselves or even the truth of someone that we were really excited about. We don't want to admit that things might not work out with them after investing a certain amount of time or something. Yeah. Because we're coming at the situation with that non-judgment piece, it helps us to let go of the fear of shame, the fear of ourselves being bad or wrong. I mean, dating is tough. It's a risk. We're putting ourselves out there to be, perceived by the other person. And we can take that personally. Oh, are they going to accept me? Am I good enough for them? Are they going to reject me? We're putting the power in the other person. But when we can be mindful, we say, oh, there's no right or wrong. We're all unique, valuable people in our own right. Is this person the kind of person that is going to benefit me and what I'm looking for, and vice versa? And if not, that's okay. None of us are bad or wrong.
Yeah, and I think that's important too. The part we said about, like, it's not necessarily right or wrong. I think a lot of people go into dating thinking like, well, it's very easy to be me focused or to be like, these are the specific rules as I see them that dating needs to follow. So, the example I give a lot of times is like, people try to text all the time. Well, I feel as though in order to build a relationship, there needs to be communication. Therefore, I need to text her all the time and she needs to respond to me all the time, because I'm going to feel some kind of way if that doesn't happen. And in the process of that, we don't think about, but does the other person actually need that? We think doing this thing is going to fulfill my need and make me feel secure. But what about that other person?
Mm-hmm. That's tough. I mean, ideally, you're with someone who knows what their needs are too. and that you can build a space where you both feel safe to share those needs. That was another problem that I had, an unhelpful behavioral pattern that I found myself doing is if I needed something, I just expected the other person to know. I wouldn't say anything. I might be passive aggressive about it, but I personally didn't know what I needed. I never took the time to sit down and be with myself. So I couldn't communicate it. That scared the crap out of me. I could not have a conversation about my needs. I grew up thinking in a really sad way that my needs really weren't important, and that if I brought up my needs, it could cause conflict or disconnection. So I felt safer to push my needs down to keep the other person's needs met, because at least that meant that the connection that I had would remain, even if that connection wasn't healthy.
Yeah. That's interesting because I like to think of myself as being emotionally intelligent and being somewhat mindful. I've definitely been with women who, like, I'll very much be saying things like, hey, like, is this what you need, or speak up? And they're trying to not tell me because they grew up in that same situation where it's like, my needs don't matter. And I'm trying to say your needs do matter. So it's like, they need to be mindful that it's okay to do that. And I still have to be mindful that if that's not how they operate or that's not what they're used to, I have to be patient with them and also let them know it's okay. But it's interesting. I come across a lot of like women like that in general that just come from those situations where they were silenced or told your opinion doesn't matter. And it sucks because, it's like that shapes your whole world, and it shapes how you view things and how you think people are receiving you. And then you go into dating and you're thinking that people are thinking things about you that they're not, because you're thinking them about yourself.
Oh, I love that. Yeah, you're really creating a safe space for them.
Yeah.
It's like and that's the other beautiful thing about mindfulness, like when you can learn to experience things outside of you and internally without judgment, you just notice them and allow them. That almost gives permission for the other person to do the same. Even if they're not quite aware they're doing it, it just creates a little bit of safety because you're open. You're not in a reactionary place or a fight or flight place. Maybe you are. We all kind of are in our modern day culture, but I think it really does help to create if you want to think about it in terms of like energy, just kind of brings the energy back to neutral.
How does the mindful dating approach differ from what people who are less successful with dating tend to do?
Well, yeah, I would question like what is successful dating? Is successful? Yeah.
I guess I'll say, like, a person that's able to date and have partners that feel like they're being listened to and that they're, maybe 2 steps ahead in terms of thinking about what their needs are versus people that aren't doing that. And then as a result, like maybe they're not being able to keep around partners as long, or they're constantly in turmoil and tension with the partners that they have.
Got it. Yeah. I think this goes back a little bit to what we were mentioning before about how we worry a lot about what other people think of us, and our attention starts to go on the other person's experience. But when we can show up mindful and we're paying attention to our thoughts, our body sensations, any emotions that are coming up, that helps us to stay on our side of the road. We worry about things that we can control. When we put our worth in the rejection or the acceptance of our date, that can be devastating. And that can really, like, at least for me, it tanks my week. If I get ghosted and I take it personally, it really takes you out of a place of power too, because I used to feel like really desperate. Maybe somebody comes into my life and they're not really checking all my standards. But if I start feeling like they need to choose me, or else that means I'm unlovable, then I start to really put up with things that aren't healthy. I might default into those patterns of behavior that were more so just to control the situation so that I could feel safe. And it really is almost like it is a fight or flight response. When we start to reach out for ways to feel safe in our own little bubble, it's almost like we're feeling like there's a threat, that date almost becomes a threat to us. Like they need to choose me or else I'm not safe. And when we're acting from fight or flight, that first of all, it's not a great way to start out a relationship. Does that mean you'll ever come out of fight or flight? But also, it's not really a great place for us logically to be. We're
Mm.
probably not making decisions that are going to be in our peaceful best interests in the future.
Yeah.
So mindfulness helps to really reconnect you with yourself and just stay in that centered place. It's tough. It's a practice because we're
Yeah.
still going to default and things are still going to trigger us. But you can constantly come back and say, I am lovable. I'm okay. I'm just going to take this moment to get back in touch with what it is I'm looking for myself, and try not to worry so much about being good enough for someone else. Just reminding myself that I'm already good enough for me because I say so.
Yeah, I imagine that's also got to be a bit of a like putting so much pressure on yourself. It's like you inadvertently are so focused on, okay, what do I got to do? Who do I got to be? What I got to whatever. And you're not really thinking about, again, there's another person that's in this process and they're going to have their own things they're bringing to the table. And how am I going to feel about what they bring to the table? And then, this experience is for them too. So I'm trying to make it all about me, but like, what about the experience that they're having? Like, how can I make it to where I'm not focusing so much on myself, but also focusing on like just us both being here and enjoying the energy and space that we're in the moment, And I think we get too much in our heads trying to worry so much that like I used to have the same problem back in the day of like, this has to work. And I don't know if there's any other prospects. So this has to be the thing that works. And I'm going to do all the extras. And it's like half the time they didn't need those extras. And it just felt like more pressure I was putting on them,
Yeah. When we force things like that, to me is a sign that I'm out of my connection. When there's like a craving and like it feels like an urgency that it has to work, that's my sign that I'm triggered and I need to take a pause and say, okay, what feelings are coming up in my body? This is another big part of mindfulness, is just mindfully reconnecting with your physical body, with the sensations. And this goes hand in hand with emotional intelligence too. Did you know, listeners, that every emotion that you might feel also has a physical counterpart in the body? It's going to show up differently for different people. But before I discovered all of this, I really only ever felt one, maybe two emotions: anxiety or rage.
And it was kind of like cousins of each other. Like, yeah.
Oh yeah. And they were intense. And they were so overwhelming that the idea of meditating or like feeling my feelings, I was like, hell no, I'm not doing that. Are you crazy? That sounds painful to me. But luckily, with the help of therapy and a lot of books and patience, I realized that there was so many more emotions there than just anxiety and intense anger. There was shame, a lot of shame, guilt, fear, just plain being overwhelmed by stress. And I recognized these subtleties of the emotions because I learned my body sensations.
I'm curious to know, like, for you, what were some of the things you noticed, like, if you're feeling X emotion, you notice this physical result?
Sure. For example, let's say I'm on a date, and dating is naturally stressful. So we already have that against us. But of course, I'm an introvert as well. And I get really nervous socially with anxiety. When I start to feel that anxiety coming up, what happens physically in my body is that I start to hunch over, my shoulders kind of come down, and my abdomen gets tight. It's almost like I'm subconsciously making a six-pack, like out of like my body's like getting ready for the kill, like it's preparing itself for the fight, and my muscles tense up. And what I've trained myself is to say, oh, wow, I can feel that sensation in my body. I'm anxious. And I just give myself a little mantra, you can say. I say, oh, I'm anxious. Let me exhale. I'm safe. So I'll just breathe in, let my shoulders come up, exhale, try to let that tension out, and just remind myself that I'm safe, which is, it definitely does. 10 minutes later on the date, I start to feel my shoulders hunching over again, but then I just take another exhale. Also, when I get angry, my hands clench up. I feel a lot of heat in my face. Sometimes my jaw gets tight. When I'm feeling sad, typical sad, like imagine that you're going to illustrate a animated character and how
Okay.
you would draw that character when you're feeling feelings that could help you. Like maybe draw, this could be like an art therapy thing. Draw a picture of yourself sad and notice what your body looks like and see if that actually happens the next time you're sad. Hunched over, your head's down, like you're ashamed to almost in a way have
Yeah.
your head facing up. The whole point of all of this is to build body awareness so that you can learn the emotions
Mm,
language, because sometimes it's really overwhelming to feel the emotion, but when you can pay attention to the body, it almost gives you a little bit of detachment so that you're like,
right.
oh, I am not anxiety, I'm just feeling anxiety right now. And the body helps to confirm that it truly is just a feeling, it's
Yeah.
temporary, and you do have control over how you can move through that emotion or further push it away, which is probably just going to make it get worse. I know from personal experience.
Oh yeah. Yeah. And I do wonder if like, because like the guys that watch my show, I do wonder if some of them I've actually been able to coach and talk to and see, and I'll notice just by looking at them, it's like, or they'll send me their online dating pictures, like, oh, I'm not getting any matches, and I'll look at their pictures, and it's like all their pictures, just the way their bodies are positioned, it's projecting out there like a lack of self-confidence or like not really thinking they can actually get the women they want. And it's like I'm aware. I don't know if they're actually aware that that's a thing, because I don't think we're really taught to think about like, hey, like when you're on these various dates, the person across from you is getting a read on you or feeling about you that you aren't even aware you're putting out there, because you're not being mindful of like what your internal feelings and stuff are. You're just trying to go on this date like, I'm going to wing it and do whatever and I'll be fine. And they can see that you're not confident and that you're anxious and that you've probably never been with a lot of people. Like they can tell that just based on how your body is moving on these dates.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the connection between our emotions, behaviors, and thoughts are intrinsic. So if you learn how to manage your emotions a little with this emotional intelligence, it's going to just by default change the way you think and the way you act. There's many
Mm,
different paths to change. Whatever one you can get your foot in the door, go start running.
yeah. It's so true. Your thoughts definitely. I was just thinking back to like back in my not so great dating days when I was a horrible dater. And part of it is I had very, very low self-esteem, but I used to have like really bad sinuses and my nose would be stuffy like all the time. And then I started realizing like I'm constantly telling myself toxic thoughts about myself. I need to change that. And so I would say, okay, for every like one negative thing I say about myself, I got to say like 7 positive things. And as I would do that, I would notice that my nose would stop being stuffy.
I
Like every
love
time I
that.
started being nice to myself, my sinuses went away. And I was like, how is that a connection? But it was.
I love that. And that's mindfulness right there. Is you trained yourself to listen for the negative thought.
Yeah.
Mindfulness is just like step one of a transformation process. If you don't know what to look for or when you're doing something that's not helping you, how can you make a new choice? And if you don't make new choices, you're just going to keep getting what you've always gotten. So if you're
Exactly.
unhappy with your dating life, if you feel like you're not getting enough swipes or whatever the issue is, you have control to get a new outcome. It might not be the outcome that you want straight away. It's a refinement process,
Yeah, it
but
takes time.
but it takes awareness too of like, okay, it's all one big experiment. Do different things, get some data, see what feels good, see what doesn't work, and move forward with that attitude. And dating suddenly becomes just an experience. It's not a threat. Dating is an opportunity to improve your entire life, because if in my case, learning how to work on handling my anxiety, dealing with my emotions, working on that self-love aspect just to be able to show up for dating at all has rippled into every other area of my life. I'm so much more
Mm,
confident and calm. I used to have, I would give myself migraines out of the stress of a date.
wow.
And I don't want to jinx myself or anything, but I have the least amount of migraines today than I have had in my life, not just before a date, but before talks or podcasts,
Mm.
things like that.
It sounds like mindfulness really has an impact beyond just the dating phase of things. Like it seems like it really trickles into like other aspects of your life as you become a more mindful person? Because like, how does that help with obviously like, relationship stuff, but also like interpersonal relationships?
Hmm. I think it goes back to what you mentioned before, this idea of taking ownership of how you're showing up and how you're contributing to either the health or the distress of any connection. When, we're all not perfect, right? Humans are flawed, and we are really limited by the skills that we were taught to us or modeled for us. It's all comes down to awareness of like, what are our limits and what are our gifts? And when we show up to a relationship, just being clear about that, not in any way that's self-deprecating or even demanding of the other person that they need to change or anything. You're just like, hey, mindfully, without judgment, this is what I'm working with. I got some great bits and I got some parts that need improvement. How about you? Can we balance each other out here? Can we move forward with accepting both sides of us, the dark and the light? And
Right.
can we enjoy life despite that constant progress?
Yeah, I do wonder if there's like a fear, because you mentioned about we're obviously imperfect. So in the course of dating, like for example, I might go out there and I know, okay, the person I'm going to be dating, they're going to have their own flaws, but I'm going to be willing to take a look at them and accept them as they are. But I wonder if we worry so much about what our flaws are that we think we're therefore not going to be good enough, and that makes us more anxious and less apt to want to even go out there and try.
For sure. So this reminds me of another part of my story. After that breakup with Marco, and I realized, hey, there's something about the way that I'm showing up that I need to really dig into, looking at myself and say, well, what am I doing and what am I not doing that I can change, that I have control over to make a different choice? So I had all that awareness. I went back out dating. I ended up going out with someone, and wouldn't you know that the awareness alone wasn't enough. The same type of breakup happened all over again. I missed the red flags all over again. And that's when I realized that we've been doing things the way that we always have for so long that our brain just does it automatically. And, this is a big part of neuroplasticity, of like this idea that like the brain does default to the easiest paths, but we can create new paths based on where we place our attention. So that's why I created a journal form that I would fill out. I made a spreadsheet for myself because I'm just like very organized like that. So I was like, okay, obviously, just because I looked at my trauma and I know what it is now, it's still not enough. I need to literally rewire my brain consistently and train myself to look out for these things that I know aren't going to get me what I want. So I made a list of questions. And the reason I'm bringing this up now is that one of those questions was, what insecurities are coming up? All those thoughts that say, oh, they have too much money for me, or I'm not sexy enough for them. Their last partner, had XYZ. I don't have that. It's not going to work. Those are all our negative critic in our heads telling us to just give up. But what if we took time after a date to look at the things that negative critic was saying with mindful awareness and curiosity, instead of just kind of letting them always be there on autoplay in the back of our mind?
Right.
What if we let them come front and center with kindness and compassion and say, oh, even though you're kind of mean, you're still me. And I want to listen to you, And then you just start debating them. You open it up and say, okay, you say I'm not good enough for them. What's the evidence here? Just because so-and-so had a Porsche and I don't, what does that mean? What does that have anything to do with our long-term compatibility? You start to kind of challenge this critic with logic, and you start to see, I don't actually have to believe this critic. And if you do that enough, suddenly the voice in your head starts getting lighter and lighter. It's almost like you're unplugging the microphone. It's still going, it's still talking, but it's not commanding the room anymore.
I try to stress that to guys that when you're going through the process of, I guess, relearning how to date, that Like, because people say, how do you get so confident? Like the real secret is that it's not that I don't still have like apprehension or nervousness or anxiousness. It's just I learned to look at like all the other evidence out there that shows that I'm wrong, to where it's like that becomes the louder noise than any momentary doubt I have. But in the beginning, it's like that doubt is what's going to like be the most loudest megaphone in your brain. And it's funny you mentioned your story, because mine was the same way in terms of I was horrible at dating. And then I started studying up on like the ins and outs of like female attraction and like what women are looking for and then what I was doing wrong. And like I had taken a semester off from school because I was doing a touring play, but I had 5 months to just kind of basically study up when I wasn't doing this play. So I got back to school the next year, like, man, I know everything to do, blah, blah, blah. And then the next year I get connected with a friend of mine. I'd been friends with for like 3 years. She starts showing interest and I'm like, this is going great. And then those same old patterns I used to do popped up and ruined it. And I was just like devastated. But it's like, I couldn't just go off of book knowledge. I had to actually like regularly put in the work. And that's what started me doing this stuff, was like, I wrote a book about all the things to not do, because I had to really sit down and analyze what are the things that I'm doing consistently that are like messing these things up. And that's what helped. And that's what started this. But like, yeah, like you have to do that work. Like, you can't just read stuff, listen to stuff, and then be like, I got it, and then think you're good. It's like, it does take practice. And I think we're not in the habit of trying to give like an overnight, like say these 3 things or these 3 thoughts, and then boom, you'll be fine. It's like, that's not really how this works. You have to put the work in.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And the more you allow yourself to notice the pattern, the more you believe it. Because that's what our brain does. Like, that negative critic is really, it's got our back. It's trying to help us. It probably noticed sometimes in our past where certain things happened and we got hurt. So it's always on the hunt for that next threat. And it's just warning us. It noticed patterns back then. We can notice patterns for it now. And I think that's why journaling after a date, like every time you come home from a date, you might have a few different insecurities that you write down, but there might be the same one that keeps coming up. And then you'd be like, Lauren, why do you consistently think you don't have enough money? Girl, you have tons of money. Like, get over yourself. Like, you know, like you almost like it becomes a laughable thing when you see, wow, this makes no sense. When you, am I making sense here? It's like, the more
it's like
you see it like, come up,
you start to see, you start to notice, like, because it's like you'll start to, and a similar exercise that I used to do is, I would think at one time, people aren't going to like me for how I look or the way I am, or I'm too nerdy or I talk too fast, whatever. And I started looking at like, okay, but wait, there's guys out there that literally have your same build and look just like you, that the girls you want are getting with. So it ain't that you don't have it, because you do, but you're thinking that you don't, which is why they're winning and you're not. And it's like, you have to really start basically like being your own, like, it's almost like you're on trial for yourself and you're both defense and prosecution, and your prosecution team has to come in and say, this is all the evidence that shows that you were in fact wrong. And like, as you do that, you start to be like, oh, I need to shut the heck up, because I'm just making all these complaints about myself, and most of them aren't actually true. Like, oops.
Yes. You nailed it. One of the other questions that I asked myself after a date was, what did I love about myself? And it's the first, I think it's like the third question on the form that I have, because when you come home from a date, it's like, at least for me, I go into that state of, oh my gosh, when are they going to text me back? What if they ghost me again? And it becomes about them again. I give them all the power. But coming back to that place of self-love, like you're saying, like building up your confidence, reminding yourself that, like, I really want to celebrate the fact that I showed up authentic today. And even though I was anxious, I did a really great job of trying to be present and not getting wrapped up in my anxious thoughts. Or I really love that I had the guts to wear something that was comfortable instead of wearing the low cut boob shirt that I thought he would want me to wear, little things like that. And when you start out your journal session from that place, it just helps you to see, oh yeah, I'm my number one cheerleader. And if that critic tries to make an appearance to tell me that I'm not worthy, that cheerleader's already here. So there's more than one person at the party, basically.
You did this for yourself, like you were going home from dates and you were journaling up. So how did this then translate into you making the Meta Date Journal app, and then how is that app set up to help people be more mindful in their dating journey?
Sure. Well, this spreadsheet that I used, I freaking loved it. I did it, like, I went out on like dozens of dates. I used it for multiple dates with the same partner. And as an anxious dater, I felt so much more at ease. I felt a
Hmm.
lot more confident that I wasn't going to choose the old, unhealthy, and potentially toxic relationships of the past, because I knew that I was carving out time to consciously reflect and make sure that if something did come up, I would catch it as soon as possible. So after experiencing this and just feeling a huge weight lifted, and dating suddenly became like easy for me. It was fun. I wasn't stressed. I didn't feel like I
Isn't
was
that
a
great?
un-
When like you suddenly like know what you're doing on dates and just like you can go on a date like Arnie, this is gonna be great because you just have that energy about you now. Yeah.
I do. I freaking love dating now. It's the best. So I was like, okay, I really feel like this is going to work for more people. I want to help people share it just like you. I ended up reading a book by a therapist of over 20 years. Her name is Christy Maxey. She had wrote a book on self-love. And I was like, hey, we Zoomed. Like, she's all the way in Arizona. I'm in New Jersey. I was like, hey, I have this form. I really love it. Is it like just me that it worked for, or could this be something to work for everyone? And she was like, no, there's actually a lot in here. A lot of it, of course, was mindfulness based, but there's other evidence based practices that I didn't even realize I was touching on. And she
Oh
helped
wow.
me pull all the dots together, like curate the wording of it. And we turned it into a co authored book called The Mindful Dating Journal.
Okay.
And since then, we have adapted it for a free mobile app. It's all the same questions. It's completely free, as I said. But I
Okay.
just love it because when you're on a date, chances are you're probably driving to a restaurant, or maybe you're taking the subway there and back. That's a key crucial time. I'd say if you can carve out 5 minutes after the date to either open the app or reflect in your journal, you can really make sure that you're getting the gut instincts out on paper right away. If you wait too long, a lot of times our brain can like adjust, like we kind of
Yes.
we paint a different picture of what happened. So I think it's really important to have that convenience of the mobile app, that just right then and there, before you even leave the restaurant parking lot, you can say, did I
Mm.
have a good time? Does this person have the same long-term goals as me? Do they remind me of my parents or past partners in any way? What
Mm.
emotions did I feel in my body tonight? Did I notice any red flags? How about green flags or even yellow flags? Things that
Mm.
we need to kind of keep an eye out for and make sure that they don't turn into yellow or red flags rather.
Right. Right.
And that can really change your definition of what a good date looks like. When you
Mm.
do that consistently, I used to think that what I needed was somebody that really wanted to watch documentaries with me on a Friday night, like another fellow introvert. But I
Yeah. Yeah.
realized
Yeah.
that there's a lot of great things about extroverts that really balance me out. And I used to be
Mm.
like, no, I don't want an extrovert. But it's like, you know what? Maybe I need to be a little bit open minded here and see what happens. It's another great thing about mindfulness too, is it helps us to let go of attachments to
Mm-hmm.
expectations, because we're just here right now. If we feel safe right now, we can just experience things for what it is, and we just soak up all that new data, all the information about the world that we might have been shutting out because we thought we only wanted one type of thing.
Mm. And I try to stress to people like, hey, you definitely want to go out there and you want to really, dip your toe in the pool and see, as you date more people, you'll start to know your likes and dislikes and what things you really gel with in a relationship. But I think that the app that you created, I think that's really good in a sense of, as an introvert, one of the things that we're really great at is analyzing. And a lot of times when we're on dates, we're trying to analyze, but we are kind of haphazardly doing it. And I think the more concrete tools you can have that can really allow you to sit down and like list out, okay, this is what I like. This is what I didn't like. This is where I saw flags. This is where I saw some great stuff. And then being able to say, okay, how did I feel on this date? Was I feeling anxious? Was I nervous? Was I happy? Did I, feel something weird about them? Like having that down and being able to see it in front of you is actually very, very helpful.
Yeah, you bring up another great point. Having that time to reflect after the date does free you up to be fully present in the moment. Because, oh my God, I don't know how many times I'll say something embarrassing on a date And then for the next 5 minutes, I'm only half paying attention to what the other person is saying. Because I'm like, oh my God, I can't believe I said that. What are they going to think? And like going all these conversations inside of my head. And that's doing me a disservice and that other person a disservice, because now I'm missing any
Right.
data that just came up. And perhaps he's feeling distant, or she, or whatever. So it allows you to just say, oh, you can train your mind with that mindfulness to say, oh, here I go again in my anxious spiral. Let me just come back to the moment. And you can do that with any number of anchors. You can use the body, like exhaling. That's always a great tool that brings me back. Another thing that you can use is notice the sound of their voice, or just make eye contact with them. That'll bring you back into their energy in the moment. Anything that you can use your senses for will help you to break that logic pattern and come back into the present moment.
Nice. What other, for people who have experienced like a number of dating disappointments, it can be very, very hard to not beat yourself up and to not think about, I gotta be better next time and whatever. Like, what advice would you give them to help them like maintain more optimism and motivation as they're trying to practice being a mindful dater? And also, how can you like, as a person that's trying to get to learn to be a more mindful dater, how can you encourage them not to like beat themselves up if they don't get it right away?
Mm-hmm. Well, it is a practice. I didn't just come up with this because of that one breakup. I've been doing it for years. And I did have, like I said, help from therapists. So give yourself grace and recognize that it's totally human and normal to have these feelings, to have the struggles. It's all a part of our human life. But it's almost like the secret is how I almost started out this podcast, actually. Remember I said that I used to look back on my relationship and say, oh, I got dumped at Disney World. But there's a lot of negative energy, and that victim mode comes out in that. But when you look at it, instead of saying, oh, I've had all these dating disappointments, nothing works out for me, you could instead say, like I say now, temporarily loving someone cracked me open in the best way possible. So every date you go out on that doesn't work out, what did you learn? Every disappointment, what was it that you were disappointed by? Because that's probably revealing a need. And that's just helping you get clear on what it is you really wanted. And when you have that knowledge, you can make a new choice. So dating is truly just a refinement. You go out there, eyes wide open, and see everything that happens not as good or bad. It's just data.
Interesting. I appreciate that, because I've tried to stress that ultimately, for me, what worked was when I started treating dating like a research project. Like, it's nothing personal. I'm going to go on a date. I'm going to hope that stuff works out. But I'm really looking at, okay, based on these various points, are we going to be a good match? If I ask for a second date and she flakes, okay, what did I learn? Okay, that means on a previous date, maybe some stuff came up that I wasn't aware of, that I need to be more aware of. So for the next person I go out with, those things won't happen. But it's like, it makes me take dating less personally than if I'm not being mindful and I'm making it all about, I got to be the most perfect person. They got to feel things for me or I'm going to be disappointed. And I'm basing my success of dating on if every person I go out with wants to have a subsequent date or hookup or whatever.
For sure. I think there's a beautiful balance between the amount of logic we can bring to the dating process and how much we are emotionally present. It's that emotional intelligence again, right? A lot of people, when you're trying to stay safe, at least for me, we do want to just look at the facts. Let's leave emotions out of it, right? You know, I don't want to get hurt. I'm just going to do what feels safe. And that's fine. It's good to have a checklist of standards. But if you're going to do that, please balance it with the emotions too. Because if your emotions aren't present, then any of that data that you might be getting from the other person on that emotional level, there's nothing to bounce that off of. So you're going to end up getting into a relationship based on logic alone. And that actually might be one of the patterns that you're doing that isn't leading you to the emotional, that the relationship that actually meets your emotional needs. It's tough.
And I'll say too, for guys, I think we very much think we're, because I used to think of like, oh, women are more emotional, men are more logical. It's like, I don't believe that. I think that we are more analytically logical. Women are more emotionally logical in a sense, but guys get in their feelings too. And I think that we're trying to use analytical data points to try to prove to women something about our feelings, and then we don't understand why they're going away. And it's like, you have to understand that, like, just because because this thing and this thing equals this thing, so therefore you should feel this thing, like, that's still an emotional response, and it's not one that's going to get you the results, because you're not being mindful of how this other person is operating in their mental space and in what their needs and stuff are. And it just makes it harder than it needs to be.
Yeah, I mean, regardless of your gender, you have emotions as a human. They are there for you. They're like a really expensive microscope in the lab, right? You can use that microscope or not. You can use the old one, or you can use whatever. But like I'm trying to say here is that they're a tool. And if you can bring that into your dating process along with the logical data, then you have a lens to observe all of that logical data. They work together. And it's a beautiful exploration into your needs when you can see them through the lens of your emotions, and to feel safe to do that. And when you can appreciate them without judgment, just let them be with you. I think it's shocking how much you'll change in the way that you show up for other people too, that you'll have access to so much more emotional depth to bring to a relationship, that intimacy that you could have with someone deepens as well.
That's so true. Well, this has been a very fascinating conversation. Where can people find you on the internet?
Sure. I invite you to come check me out on my podcast. We talk about mindful dating all the time. It's called Date in Peace. Or you can find me on Instagram at Metadate, METTA.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, thank you so much, Lauren, for coming on and talking to us about this. Like I said, I've had people asking me about emotional intelligence and being a more responsive dater and stuff. So this has been, I'm sure they'll find this to be very, very, very helpful, as I have as well, because I'm always a student, if nothing else. So appreciate you coming on and talking to us.
Thank you so much, Harry. It was my pleasure.
Be sure to go to introvertdatingsuccess.com for more ebooks, audiobooks, and programs designed to help you date as your introverted self while still getting your alone time. I'm HarryWilmington, and I'll catch you guys on the next one. I'm out. Peace.
You's a bad boy, but you can't stop, won't stop. You a high earning, high value, high class man. You a high earning, high value, high class man. You a high earning, high value, high class man. You a high class man. You a high class man. You a high earning, high value, high class man.